It was another gray, gloomy day in the dour city I called home. The bitter chill seemed to seep into people's very bones, hardening their hearts and sharpening their tongues. Surliness reigned supreme as I set out on my daily constitutional, a bouquet of white lilies clutched in my withered hands. Since losing my dear Evelyn last year, these melancholy walks to the cemetery had become my sole respite from the loneliness that haunted our empty house. But today felt different somehow. A palpable heaviness clung to the air, more oppressive than the usual dreariness. And then there was the cat. A scrawny black alley cat had been shadowing my steps all morning, its vivid green eyes boring into me with unsettling intensity. 10 times now I had spied the creature darting between buildings or perched atop fences, never straying far from my heels. Superstitious nonsense, I chided myself, even as an involuntary shiver ran down my spine. What compelled the beast to trail me so doggedly? Arriving at Evelyn's gravesite, I arranged the flowers with care and allowed my fingertips to trace the inscription etched in unyielding stone. Sorrow welled up in me with practiced ease, tears smarting behind my eyelids. After murmuring my customary words of remembrance and adoration, I pulled my coat tighter and turned to trudge home, already dreading the bleak emptiness awaiting me there. The feline was nowhere to be seen on my return trip. Its abrupt absence was more unnerving than its presence had been. Lost in pensive rumination, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, only to freeze in utter bewilderment. There on the sofa lounged the black cat, appraising me coolly as if it were master of the house. A scrap of paper rested by its paws. With trembling hands, I snatched up the note. Scrawled in spidery script were the words, "Don't leave your window open. Now, where did you come from?" I muttered, casting about for signs of entry. The cat simply yawned, showcasing needle-sharp teeth. Every window appeared firmly shut and locked. Movement in my periphery drew my gaze to the front walk, where a stooped old crone in a threadbare shawl stood watching my house with eerie focus. I hurried outside, determined to demand answers, but faltered when the hag spoke first in a reedy rasp. "Don't leave your window open." "What window?" I snapped. "How did you get that cat into my house? Everything is shut tight." A flicker of impatience crossed her seamed visage. "You checked the wrong windows, foolish man. Not all windows are made of glass." With that, she hobbled off, leaving me sputtering. The rest of the day passed without incident as I puttered about, the cat my silent companion. In the absence of human interaction, I found myself nattering on to the animal as if it could comprehend my every word. Perhaps isolation had finally addled my wits entirely. Weeks slid by uneventfully. My feline houseguest made itself comfortable, and I grew accustomed to its enigmatic presence. A sense of the uncanny prickled at the edges of my awareness, but I brushed it aside, unwilling to ruminate overmuch on the creature's origins. And then, gradually, I began to notice a queer change stealing over me. It started in my eyes. Their once familiar deep brown hue was leaching away, yielding to a brilliant, unsettling green, the exact viridescent shade of the cat's unblinking stare. Consultation with an ophthalmologist and a battery of tests revealed no underlying ailment, just a rare and harmless quirk of pigmentation, I was assured. Months passed, and my eyes became an ever more striking emerald, drawing incredulous double-takes and whispered speculation from everyone I encountered. Meanwhile, the cat's gaze slowly darkened to inky black, an inscrutable void that threatened to swallow me whole. The animal, elderly already when it first slunk into my life, eventually succumbed to the ravages of time. I buried it in the local pet cemetery, shedding genuine tears over the freshly turned earth. Without my constant companion and still raw with unresolved grief over Evelyn, I impulsively sold the house, donated most of my belongings, and booked passage to China. A fresh start in a land halfway around the world seemed just the thing to jolt me from my maudlin fugue. I settled in a vibrant expatriate enclave in Chongqing, charmed by the bustling city's ancient meets modern aesthetic and the warm openness of my neighbors. Immersing myself in Mandarin lessons and Tai Chi in the park, volunteering as an English tutor, and exploring the famous hot pot restaurants occupied my days. For the first time in years, the future held a tentative glimmer of hope. until one sweltering summer evening when an all-too-familiar rapping sounded at my door. I cracked it open to find the wizened face of the cryptic old woman from back home leering up at me. Shock electrified my nerves. How had she found me on the other side of the globe? "You must close your window," she croaked without preamble, eyes darting past me into my flat. Irritation surged through me, drowning out my unease. "Look, I don't know what your fixation is with my windows, but they're all closed. See?" I gestured sharply at the tightly sealed panes. "Now, if you'll excuse me." Quick as a snake, her gnarled claw clamped around my wrist with startling strength. "Still so blind," she hissed. "I speak not of those windows, fool, but of these." A skeletal finger jabbed toward my jade-green eyes. I recoiled, my pulse stampeding. "What in God's name are you on about, you batty old witch?" Perhaps not my most diplomatic response, but the woman was clearly a lunatic. Canny, knowing gleamed in her sunken eyes as she asked, "And how fares your feline friend?" "My cat? He died ages ago, back in England," I snapped. Grief panged beneath my breastbone. She shook her head slowly. "Stupid, stupid boy. I tried to help you, but I fear it's far too late now." "Help me?" I sputtered. "From what? If you don't start talking sense." "He has already entered through your window." She cut me off gravely. "The one you left open in your soul. You will not be the one to go out." Indignant denials died on my lips as she melted back into the teeming throng of pedestrians. Deeply shaken, I locked and double-checked every entrance to my apartment before collapsing into a fitful slumber plagued by nightmares of baleful green eyes and gaping, glassless windows to strange worlds. In the harsh light of day, I chalked up the encounter to homesickness-induced hallucinations. The woman was clearly off her rocker, spouting ominous nonsense to get a rise out of me. I threw myself into my language studies and community service with redoubled focus, determined to leave the unsavory incident behind me. But within the week, I fell deathly ill. Relentless fevers and chills racked my frame as vivid fever dreams of prowling through midnight alleys on 4 silent paws tormented my sleep. I cycled in and out of delirium for a hellish month before my constitution finally overcame the mysterious ailment. The first thing I did upon returning home from the hospital was to scrutinize my reflection. I stared, slack-jawed, at the rich chocolate brown gazing back at me from the mirror. At some point during my convalescence, my eyes had reverted to their original hue. Elation surged through me. Somehow the bizarre ocular affliction had reversed itself. I hooped with slightly manic glee, capering about my apartment in celebration. But each night without fail, I dreamed I wore the skin of my dearly departed cat. I loped on velvet paws through foggy English streets, green eyes lambent in the gloom. An inexorable pull drew me ever onward to some unspecified destination. I woke sweat-drenched and shaking, filled with amorphous dread. After months of this nocturnal torment, I cracked. I had to return to England to visit the cat's grave. Some instinct I dared not examine too closely insisted that therein lay the key to banishing the uncanny dreams. And so I found myself stepping off a plane at Heathrow, bone-weary and twitchy with nerves, into the clammy drizzle of my erstwhile homeland. The cemetery was deserted when I arrived, a threadbare bouquet of white lilies in hand. Kneeling before the tiny headstone, I let my fingertips graze the damp earth as I arranged the blooms. A sudden exhaustion stole over me, and despite the misting rain, I curled up beside the modest plot. Just a quick kip and I'd be on my way. I woke with a violent start, disoriented and stiff. To my amazement, I found myself not in the graveyard, but on the steps of my city's library. Pushing to my feet, I faltered. The building soared dizzyingly above me, far taller than it had any right to be, a warped funhouse mirror of its true self. Mouth desert dry, pulse a kettle drum in my ears, I stumbled to a nearby puddle to splash water on my face, and recoiled in horror. For reflected in the murky water was not my own visage, but the furry black countenance of the cat, vivid green eyes wide with shock.
Non, impossible.
A nightmare. I squeezed my eyes shut and shook my head violently, willing myself to wake. But when I looked again, the feline face remained. My face. Hysteria clawed at my throat. I bolted through the streets in a blind panic, clumsy in this alien body. The few human passersby paid me no mind, just another stray mongrel skulking about. And then I saw him, me, the human me, striding down the sidewalk with a bouquet of lilies in hand, brown eyes focused somewhere in the middle distance. I darted into his path, yowling frantically, but he merely sidestepped me with a distracted glower. Again and again I tried to waylay him, to no avail. He couldn't or wouldn't recognize the desperate soul inhabiting this feline form. Somewhere deep in my mind, I felt the barest flicker of smug satisfaction, there and gone in a flash. The man had entered through the window I left open. Let him see how he liked this half-life in stolen skin. I shuddered and shied from the dark notion. Not my thought. Couldn't be. With a creeping sense of dread, I slunk after my human shell, dogging his steps through the sodden streets. I watched him enter our old house and, after a moment's hesitation, slipped through the cat door to follow. Inside, my body collapsed on the sofa, already looking haggard and worn. Empty, defeated. On the cushion beside him lay a crumpled scrap of paper that chilled me to my core. "Don't leave your window open." As I padded closer, a noise drew my gaze to the front window, and there on the other side of the glass, green eyes agleam with malice and vindication, crouched the black cat, wearing my face, my soul. In that crystalline instant, two terrible truths crashed over me. I had not, as I'd assumed, swapped bodies with my cat through some malevolent sorcery. No, I had left a window open in my soul, a vulnerability born of grief and loneliness and despair, and something had seized the opportunity to slip inside, to claim a new skin, and in doing so, I had unwittingly offered up my own vacated vessel, an empty window through which another lost soul, my feline companion, my unlikely friend, could enter in turn. From beyond the veil of death, a scream built in my throat, emerging as a strangled yowl. But no human heard. No human could anymore. The window gaped open, and someone else peered out, smug and satisfied in their purloined face. Despair crashed over me in a freezing wave, followed swiftly by a towering rage. I would not accept this. I would not let some opportunistic body thief condemn me to life on four paws while it gallivanted about in my skin. There had to be a way to reverse this, to cast the interloper out and reclaim my own form. Even if I had to claw my way back through that metaphysical window by force. I leapt at my seated doppelganger with an ear-splitting caterwaul, claws extended, only to meet unyielding glass. The scene before me dissolved like mist, replaced by the interior of a cramped pet carrier. Beyond the metal grate, the airport bustled, travelers scurrying to and fro. A pair of green eyes, glowing with ancient, eldritch knowing, peered in at me from a time-ravaged human face. "Hush now," croaked the crone from the stoop. "None of that yowling, or they'll never let you on the plane. We've a long flight to China ahead of us, my little Maugway. You've served your purpose." And with that, she hefted my carrier, and me within it, into the seething throng of humanity. Stunned into hopeless silence, I could only stare out at the world that was no longer mine to walk upright. My soul forever traded for fleeting feline companionship to ease a lonely man's broken heart. The window was closed, the house abandoned, the man gone. I was no longer the master of my fate, but a pawn in a game whose rules I could not begin to fathom. But one thing I knew with unshakable certainty as I huddled in my plastic prison: I should never have left my window open.